The cold morning air bit at my face as I climbed into the cockpit of my MiG-3. My hands were shaking, but not from the October frost that had settled over the airfield near Zagorsk. It was fear, pure and simple, though I would never admit it to the other pilots of the 42nd Fighter Aviation Regiment. We all wore the same mask of grim determination, the same forced confidence that had become our uniform as much as the leather flying jackets that barely kept out the cold. 4 months. That's how long the war had been raging since the Germans crossed our borders in June. 4 months. That felt like 4 years. I was 20 years old, though I felt ancient. The boy who had left the aviation school in Odessa seemed like someone from another lifetime, someone who had believed that flying was about glory and honor and soaring through clouds like the heroes in the propaganda posters. That boy had died somewhere over the burning forests west of Moscow, replaced by this hollow-eyed creature who knew that flying meant watching friends explode in fireballs, meant hearing screams over the radio that cut off suddenly, meant landing back at base and counting the empty spaces where planes should be. The mechanics were still working on my plane. One of them, a grizzled sergeant named Volkov, who had survived the Finnish War, caught my eye and nodded. The MiG-3 wasn't much to look at, already showing wear from constant combat missions, patches on the fuselage where German bullets had found their mark on previous flights. But she was mine, and she had brought me back alive 3 times when she probably shouldn't have. I'd named her Katya, after a girl I'd known in Babruisk, though I never told anyone that. Men who named their planes didn't last long, the other pilots said. Too much attachment. But everyone did it anyway. The briefing had been short. German reconnaissance planes were probing deeper into our airspace, photographing our defences, our troop movements, our airfields. High-altitude flights, usually Messerschmitt Bf-110s with their twin engines and long range, sometimes escorted by the faster Bf-109 fighters. Our job was simple. Stop them. How we stopped them didn't matter. Just stop them. I had already scored 1 victory that morning. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 that I'd caught climbing through a cloud bank. It had been a good kill. Clean. The way they taught us at the academy. A burst from my Shulkaz machine guns and 20mm cannon had stitched across his engine cowling, and I'd seen smoke streaming before he'd rolled away and disappeared below. 1 of 4 from the German formation. The other 3 had scattered, and I'd chased them east, away from the airfield, until my ammunition counter had shown zeros across the board. That's when I saw him. 3,000 meters below, a twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110 flying straight and level, bold as brass, heading directly toward our airfield. The recognition silhouette was unmistakable. The long fuselage, the twin tail booms, the greenhouse canopy. A reconnaissance plane, probably with cameras mounted in the belly, photographing everything below. And I was out of ammunition. My throat went dry. I should turn back, head for the airfield, land, rearm. That was procedure. That was what a sane pilot would do. But by the time I landed and reloaded, he would be gone, his photographs safely stored, our positions revealed to German bombers that would come tonight or tomorrow and turn our airfield into a crater. How many of my friends would die because I followed procedure? I pushed the stick forward and dove. The MiG-3 accelerated rapidly, the wind screaming past the canopy. My altimeter unwound as I plummeted, 2,500 meters, 2,000, 1,500. The Messerschmitt grew larger in my gun sight. I could see the black crosses on the wings now, the individual panels of the camouflage pattern. In the rear cockpit, I could see the gunner's position, the machine gun pointing backward. He hadn't seen me yet. 1,000 meters. The gun, useless now without ammunition, stayed silent. My hands gripped the stick so hard my knuckles showed white through my flying gloves. What was I doing? This was insane. I would die. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to break off, to climb away, to save myself. But the war had taught me that rationality was a luxury we couldn't afford anymore. 500 meters. The gunner saw me. I saw the flicker of his weapon, saw the tracer rounds reaching out toward me like fingers of fire. One round clanged off my engine cowling. Another punched through my port wing. The Messerschmitt's pilot saw me too, because the heavy fighter suddenly broke right, trying to evade. But the Bf-110 was not a nimble aircraft, and I was diving at over 500 kilometers per hour, 200 meters. I could see the German pilot's face now, or at least the shape of his head in the cockpit. Was he scared? Was he praying? Did he have a family waiting for him in some distant German town? In that split second, he wasn't an enemy. He was just another pilot, another young man caught in this grinding meat machine of war. Then the moment passed, and he was just a target again. I pulled up slightly, aiming not for the fuselage, but for the tail assembly. The Taran, the ramming attack, was something we'd all heard about, whispered about in the ready rooms and barracks. The desperate measure, the last resort. A few pilots had tried it. Most had died. Some had survived. The ones who survived became legends. 50 meters. The Messerschmitt's gunner was firing continuously now, his tracer rounds making a solid stream. One hit my propeller with a sound like a hammer on an anvil. Another shattered my canopy, and suddenly the cockpit was full of freezing wind and flying glass. Blood ran down my cheek from a cut I didn't remember receiving, then impact. The sound was indescribable, a tearing, shrieking, grinding roar that seemed to go on forever, though it probably lasted less than a second. My propeller blades, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, struck the Messerschmitt's tail assembly from below. The German plane's tail practically disintegrated under the impact, pieces of aluminum and steel spinning away into the slipstream. The control surfaces, the rudders, the elevators, separated from the airframe. The Messerschmitt immediately nosed over, beginning the death spiral that no pilot could recover from. But my MiG was dying too. The impact had nearly stopped my propeller, and my engine was screaming in protest, making sounds no engine should make. The whole aircraft shuddered and bucked like a living thing in its death throes. My instrument panel was a chaos of red warning lights and wildly swinging needles. Oil pressure dropping, engine temperature climbing, hydraulics failing. I fought the controls, trying to level out, trying to coax just a little more life from Katya. The airfield was ahead, maybe 5 kilometers. I could see it through the shattered canopy, the familiar rectangle of cleared land, the dispersed aircraft around the perimeter. 5 kilometers might as well have been 500. The engine was seizing up, the prop windmilling uselessly. I was gliding now, trading altitude for distance, a ratio every pilot knew by heart, but never wanted to calculate for his own survival. The ground rushed up, trees, fields, a road with what looked like a column of trucks. The airfield was close now, so close. I could see tiny figures running on the ground, pointing up at my crippled fighter. The landing gear. Had I lowered the landing gear? I couldn't remember. My hands moved through the motions automatically, muscle memory from hundreds of training landings. A thump and vibration told me the gear had deployed, though whether it was fully locked I had no way of knowing. The boundary of the airfield passed beneath me. I was too low, too slow, but I was going to make it. Katya's nose dropped one final time, and I pulled back on the stick with every bit of strength I had. The wheels hit hard, harder than any landing I'd ever made. The landing gear collapsed on the starboard side, and suddenly I was skidding sideways across the frozen earth, the world spinning crazily outside the canopy. Something tore away with a screech of metal. The port wing dug into the ground, and the MiG spun once, twice. Then everything stopped. Silence. Absolute silence, except for the ringing in my ears and the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. I was alive. The thought seemed absurd, impossible. I had just rammed a German reconnaissance plane at 5,000 meters, rode a disintegrating fighter down to earth, crash-landed on a half-functioning undercarriage, and I was alive. My hands were still gripping the stick. I had to consciously force my fingers to release it. The canopy was jammed. I hammered at it with my fist, then my shoulder, panic beginning to override the shock. What if there was fire? What if... The canopy suddenly flew open from outside, and hands were reaching in, pulling me out. Volkov, the mechanic. Others I didn't recognize. Someone was talking to me, asking if I was hurt, but their words seemed to come from very far away. I shook my head, not in answer, but to clear it. Blood from the cut on my face dripped onto my flight suit. "The German?" I managed to croak out. "Crashed 2 kilometers west," someone said. "Straight in, no survivors." No survivors. 2 men, maybe 3 if there had been a radio operator in that Messerschmitt. Dead because of me. Because I had rammed them from below and torn their tail off and sent them tumbling out of the sky with no chance to bail out, no chance to pull up, no chance at all. I should feel victorious. I should feel proud. Instead, I just felt hollow. The regiment commander appeared, his face unreadable. I straightened instinctively, tried to salute, realized I was shaking too badly to manage it properly. He waved away the gesture. "A Taran," he said. It wasn't a question. "You're first?" I nodded. "Probably not your last," he said. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "Well done, Lieutenant. We need more pilots with that kind of initiative. The motherland needs more pilots with that kind of courage." Courage? Was that what it was? It hadn't felt like courage in the moment. It had felt like desperation, like terror, like the only option in a situation where all options were bad. But I didn't say that. Instead, I mumbled something about doing my duty, about protecting the airfield. The words felt hollow, like I was reading from a script. They took me to the medical tent, where a doctor cleaned and bandaged my face. The cut was superficial, he said. I was lucky. Lucky. I had just deliberately crashed my aircraft into an enemy plane at 5,000 meters and somehow walked away. If that was luck, I thought, then luck was a far stranger thing than I had imagined. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that Messerschmitt in my mind's eye, kept seeing the moment of impact, kept seeing the tail assembly disintegrating under my propeller, kept wondering about the men inside, about who they were, whether they had time to understand what was happening, whether they had time to be afraid. In the darkness of the barracks, with the sound of other pilots snoring around me, I finally let myself shake. Let myself feel the terror I hadn't allowed myself to feel while it was happening. Let myself understand how close I had come to dying. But I had survived. And in the morning, there would be another briefing, another mission, another patrol. The war didn't stop for fear or doubt, or the weight of taking another man's life. The war ground on, relentless and hungry, and pilots like me were just grist for its mill. The only question was whether we would feed it German lives or our own. I fell asleep just before dawn and dreamed of falling. The dreams would come to haunt me in the weeks and months that followed, but so would the reality of what I had done, what I would have to do again. Because that first ramming attack in October 1941 was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Winter came early that year, and with it came the German advance on Moscow. Our regiment moved 3 times in November alone, always retreating, always falling back before the Wehrmacht's inexorable advance. The airfields we abandoned were often bombed within hours, sometimes while we could still see them from our new positions. We lost pilots not to combat, but to accidents, to exhaustion, to planes that simply broke down from overuse and couldn't be repaired. The replacement pilots who arrived were younger than I was, fresh from abbreviated training courses, their eyes still bright with idealism that would be crushed within days if they lived that long. I flew 4, sometimes 5 missions a day, patrol flights, escort missions, ground attack sorties when they needed every available aircraft to slow the German advance. My victory count rose, 6, then 10, then 15. Numbers that should have meant something, but somehow didn't. Each kill was just another small defiance against the tide that threatened to overwhelm us all. But it was the second ramming that changed me. The first had been instinct, desperation. The second was calculation. February 1942. The Germans had been stopped at the gates of Moscow, thrown back in a winter counter-offensive that surprised everyone, including us. But they weren't beaten. They regrouped, reformed their lines, and continued their pressure. The war settled into a grinding, brutal stalemate where every metre of ground was bought with blood. I was flying a new plane now, a Yak-1, a massive improvement over the MiG-3. Faster, more manoeuvrable, better armed. I actually felt confident in it, felt like I had a fighting chance against the Messerschmitt Bf-109s that dominated the skies. The Yak-1 responded to my touch like a well-trained horse, and I had begun to understand it, to anticipate its quirks and capabilities. The mission was a routine patrol over Torzhok, 4 aircraft, stacked at different altitudes, watching for German incursions. It should have been quiet. The weather was poor, low clouds and intermittent snow squalls that reduced visibility to a few hundred meters. Bad flying weather, which usually meant both sides stayed on the ground. I was at 3,000 meters when I spotted the Junkers Ju-88 breaking out of a cloud bank below me. A medium bomber, twin engine, probably on a reconnaissance mission, or perhaps a lone harassment raid. He was alone, no escorts, no wingman. Just one German plane, deep in Soviet airspace, relying on the bad weather and his speed to keep him safe. I rolled into a dive, closing the distance rapidly. The Junkers crew spotted me almost immediately. Hard not to notice a fighter diving out of the clouds with its guns blazing. I opened fire at 500 meters, my 20mm cannon and machine guns sending tracer rounds streaming toward the bomber. I saw hits sparking along the fuselage, saw pieces of aluminum skin peeling away. But the Junkers was tough, built to take punishment, and the pilot was good. He threw the bomber into a diving turn, using his speed and momentum to evade. We spiraled downward, hunter and prey, through the clouds and into the clear air below. My ammunition counter was dropping rapidly. The Yak-1 carried more ammunition than the MiG-3, but not unlimited. I fired in short bursts, trying to conserve, trying to make each burst count. More hits on the Junkers. One engine began smoking. The bomber slowed, the pilot fighting to maintain control. Click. The empty chamber sound that every pilot dreads. I was out of ammunition. The Junkers was still flying, still heading west, still escaping. Damaged, yes, but not destroyed. He might make it back to German lines, might crash land, might survive to fly again and drop more bombs on Soviet cities and Soviet soldiers, unless I stopped him. This time there was no panic, no fear-driven desperation. This time I knew exactly what I was doing. I had done it before. I had survived it before. I could do it again. I positioned myself above and behind the wounded bomber, matching his speed, calculating angles and closure rates with a part of my mind that had become coldly analytical. The German rear gunner was still at his position. I could see the gun barrel tracking me, but he wasn't firing. Out of ammunition too, probably, or wounded. The Junkers was weaving slightly, the pilot fighting damaged controls. I nosed down and accelerated, angling for the tail section. Not the fuselage this time. That would be too solid, too much mass. The tail, where my propeller could do maximum damage to control surfaces. The Junkers grew larger in my windscreen. I could see the streaks of oil on the fuselage, the fabric control surfaces on the tail. Even the scared face of the rear gunner turned back to watch me approach. Impact. Easier this time. Or maybe just more familiar. The tearing, grinding sound. The shudder that ran through my entire aircraft. The Junker's tail section crumpling under the assault of my propeller, rudder and elevators shearing away. The bomber immediately began to tumble, nose dropping, beginning the uncontrollable spin that meant death. My yak shuddered and bucked, the engine screaming, but it was still flying. The propeller was damaged. I could feel the vibration through the stick, but not destroyed. The engine was still producing power. The controls still responded. I levelled out, my heart hammering, and turned east toward our airfield. Behind me, the Junkers fell. I didn't watch it crash. Didn't need to. I knew what was happening. The helpless spin, the ground rushing up, the final impact. 4 men, probably. Pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, gunner. 4 more ghosts to join the others in my dreams. This time the landing was easier. The Yak 1's landing gear held. I taxied to my dispersal point and shut down the engine, which was making sounds that would have the mechanics cursing. The propeller was visibly bent, several blades twisted from the impact. Volkov took one look at it and shook his head. "Again, Comrade Lieutenant?" he asked. "Again," I confirmed. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. We all understood the mathematics of the Eastern Front. 1 Soviet fighter to destroy 1 German bomber was a good trade. It was a trade our commanders were willing to make, and it was a trade we pilots had to be willing to make. The only question was whether the pilot would survive to make that trade again. The commander put me in for a medal. The citation talked about heroism and devotion to the motherland and extraordinary courage. I read it and felt nothing. How could it be heroism when it was just mathematics? When it was just the coldly logical conclusion that a damaged fighter with no ammunition could still serve one final purpose? But something had changed inside me. The second ramming had been easier than the first, more controlled. I had survived twice now, which made me a statistical anomaly. Most pilots who performed a Taran died in the attempt or shortly after, but I had walked away from 2. If I could survive twice, could I survive 3 times? 4? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt almost like a challenge, like the war itself was testing me, seeing how much I could endure, how many times I could cheat death before it finally collected its due. I found myself almost looking forward to the next time, anticipating the moment when ammunition ran out and the only weapon left was the aircraft itself. That's when I knew the war had truly changed me, when the thought of deliberately crashing into an enemy aircraft no longer filled me with dread, but with a strange, cold anticipation. When the Taran was no longer the desperate last resort, but a calculated tactic. When I had become the kind of pilot who could look at a situation and think, calmly and rationally, I will ram him. The psychiatrists would probably have grounded me if they knew, but there were no psychiatrists at the front, no one to evaluate whether pilots were becoming too reckless, too detached, too willing to die. As long as we kept flying and kept killing Germans, no one asked too many questions about our mental state. Spring came, and with it came the Rasputitsa, the mud season that turned the roads into impassable quagmires and gave both sides a brief respite. The front stabilized. We got newer aircraft, better maintenance, more replacement pilots. The desperate edge of those first winter months eased slightly, but only slightly. My third ramming came in July. By then I had been transferred to a different regiment, the 6th Air Army, operating over the Novgorod Oblast. The Germans were preparing for a summer offensive, and reconnaissance flights were constant. Lone Messerschmitt, Bf-110s and Ju-88s probing our defences, photographing our positions, testing our responses. I was flying top cover for a ground attack mission when I spotted him, a Bf-110 flying at 4,000 metres, heading south. Probably had already completed his reconnaissance run and was heading home with photographs that would guide German artillery and bombers to our positions. I broke formation and climbed to intercept. My wingman called after me, asking for orders, but I ignored him. This was my kill, my mission. The Bf-110 crew saw me coming and tried to run, pushing their engines to maximum power, but I was flying a Yak-1 at optimal altitude, and I was faster, much faster. I closed to firing range and opened up with everything I had. The Bf-110 jinked and weaved, the pilot showing real skill, making himself a difficult target. My first burst missed. The second scored hits on the port wing, but nothing critical. The third burst, and my guns fell silent. Jammed. Both the cannon and the machine guns jammed simultaneously, something that shouldn't happen but did anyway. The Bf-110 pilot must have noticed I'd stopped firing, because he suddenly reversed his turn and climbed, trying to get altitude advantage. Smart move. Aggressive. This was no rookie. This was a crew that had survived long enough to learn the tricks, to develop instincts. But I had instincts too, and I had done this twice before. I pulled into a climbing turn, using my superior maneuverability to cut inside his circle. The Bf-110 pilot saw what I was doing and rolled away, trying to dive away from me. But he was too slow, too late. I was already positioned above and behind him, already committed. The village of Lyubtsi passed below us, tiny buildings and roads like a child's toy set. People down there, probably looking up at the contrails and the tiny specks of aircraft, not knowing they were watching a death dance play out at 4,000 metres. I dove, building speed, the Yak-1 accelerating smoothly. The Bf-110's rear gunner opened fire, tracer rounds reaching up toward me. I jinked left, then right, breaking his aim. 500 metres, 300, 100. His face in the rear cockpit, white and terrified, knowing what was about to happen and powerless to stop it. I aimed for the tail. Always the tail. Lighter structure. More damage from the propeller strike. Better chance of destroying control surfaces. The impact was almost gentle this time. More of a shudder than the violent collision of my first Taran. My propeller blades carved through the Bf-110's tail assembly like knives through cloth. The entire empennage separated from the fuselage, and the bomber tumbled away beneath me, already spinning. My Yak bucked and shook, the damaged propeller creating a violent vibration that rattled my teeth. But I was still flying. The engine was running rough, one cylinder probably damaged from the impact, but producing power. The controls were sluggish but responsive. I had altitude, speed, and most importantly, I was still alive. Three successful Taran attacks. 3 times I had deliberately crashed my aircraft into an enemy plane and survived. I was becoming famous, though I didn't know it yet. Pilots in other regiments were already telling stories about the lieutenant who kept ramming Germans and living to tell about it. The propaganda officers were taking notice. The commander recommended me for Hero of the Soviet Union. The leadership of the 6th Air Army rejected it, awarding me an Order of the Red Banner instead. Not dramatic enough, apparently. Or maybe they didn't want to glorify the Taran tactic too much, didn't want other pilots thinking it was a reliable method of destroying enemy aircraft. It wasn't. I was the exception, not the rule. For every pilot who survived a ramming attack, 3 died. But I had survived 3 times. What were the odds of surviving 4? Astronomical. Impossible, probably. No one had ever done it. No one had ever survived 4 ramming attacks. It wasn't physically possible. The mathematics alone argued against it. Sooner or later, the aircraft would break up completely on impact, or the pilot would be unable to escape, or the damaged aircraft would be unflyable, or any of 100 other variables would align wrong, and that would be the end. I thought about that a lot in the weeks following my 3rd Taran. Thought about probability and statistics and luck. Wondered if I was using up all my luck, if there was a finite amount, and I was running through it too quickly. Wondered if the next time would be the time the equation didn't balance, when the variables didn't align, when the dice came up snake eyes. Should have stopped. Should have said, 3 is enough. 3 is a miracle. Don't push it. Should have flown more conservatively, saved my ammunition, avoided situations where ramming was the only option. Should have done a lot of things differently. But I didn't, because by then the war had ground away everything except the mission. Survive, kill Germans, protect the motherland. Simple equations with brutal answers. And if ramming was an answer that worked, then I would keep using it until it stopped working, until the equation finally balanced against me. August 13th, 1942, Staraya Russa, the day the equation almost balanced. I was flying my 4th different aircraft type, an LA-5, the newest fighter we'd received. Powerful, fast, heavily armed. A beautiful aircraft, the best I'd ever flown. I was in love with it the first time I took off. The way the engine roared with power, the way it climbed like it could punch through the clouds and reach for the stars themselves. The mission was a patrol over the front lines. Just me, solo flight, maintaining watch over our sector. Standard mission, routine. Should have been quiet. The weather was clear, visibility unlimited. One of those rare, perfect flying days when you could see forever, and the sky felt like it belonged to you alone. That's when I saw them. A formation of bombers, 7 Junkers Ju-88s, escorted by 6 Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighters, 13 aircraft total, heading toward our lines, undoubtedly planning to bomb our positions. 1 Soviet fighter against 13 German aircraft. The mathematics were laughable. I should have called for backup, should have shadowed them and radioed their position, let other fighters intercept. That's what the tactics manual said. That's what a sane pilot would do. But backup was 10 minutes away, and in 10 minutes, those bombers would be over our lines, dropping their payloads on Soviet soldiers who couldn't defend themselves. I attacked, dove out of the sun, targeting the lead Junkers, my 20mm cannons hammering, hits along the fuselage, one engine streaming smoke. The formation scattered like startled birds, bombers breaking in different directions, escorts turning to engage. I pulled up hard, rolling away from return fire, and came around for another pass. That's when the Messerschmitt Bf 109s arrived. I hadn't seen them, hadn't known they were there. A top cover element, 4 more fighters flying high above the bombers. I'd flown right into a trap. The next minutes were chaos. I was alone, surrounded by enemies, with every aircraft in the sky trying to kill me. I wove and dodged and fired in brief bursts, trying to hit something, anything. Managed to damage another bomber, saw one of the BF-110s trailing smoke, but there were too many of them, and they were good, coordinated, working together to box me in. Ammunition counter spinning down, half empty, quarter full, running on empty. And then the BF-109's cannon round punched through my canopy and into my face. The pain was indescribable. Something warm and wet running down my face, my right eye suddenly not working, not seeing, just a red fog of agony. I screamed, I think, or maybe the scream was just in my head. The stick went loose in my hands as shock tried to drag me down into unconsciousness. Should have bailed out, should have pulled the canopy release and jumped, let the parachute save me. But I couldn't. My hands wouldn't work right. My strength was gone, drained away with the blood running down my face. I fumbled for the canopy release, couldn't find it. Tried again, my left hand slipping on the control sticky with blood. A Ju-88 flashed past my windscreen, so close I could see the individual rivets on its fuselage. One of the bombers, probably running for home. Without thinking, operating on pure instinct and training and something beyond either, I yanked the stick over and dove after it. The ramming was inevitable. My only choice. My last choice. If I was going to die anyway, and I was certain I was dying, could feel life bleeding out of my shattered face, then I would take one more German with me. One more bomber that wouldn't drop its payload on Soviet soldiers. One more small victory in a war made of small victories. I don't really remember the impact. Just a sense of collision, of my LA-5 hitting something solid, of the whole world spinning. Then suddenly I was in the air, falling, the aircraft gone from around me. The collision had torn open the canopy, or maybe I'd finally managed to release it, I'll never know, and thrown me clear. 6,000 meters. I was falling from 6,000 meters, tumbling end over end, no parachute, no hope. This was it. This was the end. 4 Taran attacks, and the 4th was the fatal one, just like the statistics said it would be. The equation had finally balanced, but my hand found the parachute release, pulled it, felt the brutal deceleration as the chute deployed, felt my harness straps bite into my shoulders, felt myself swinging beneath the white canopy. Still falling, but slowly now, controllably. Still dying, probably, from the head wound that had destroyed my eye and was still bleeding, but not dead yet. Not yet. The ground came up slowly. I tried to prepare for landing, tried to remember the training for parachute drops, but my body wasn't responding properly. Hit hard, felt something snap in my leg, then my arm. Ribs breaking. Pain layering on top of pain until it all blurred together into one continuous scream. Darkness, unconsciousness, maybe death. I wasn't sure which, didn't care anymore. I woke up in a hospital in Moscow 10 days later. They told me I'd landed in a marsh, that the soft ground had probably saved my life, that partisan fighters had found me, pulled me out of the muck, gotten me to a field hospital, that the surgeons there had stabilized me enough to transport me back to Moscow, that I'd been unconscious the entire time, floating in some grey space between life and death. My right eye was gone. My leg was broken in 2 places. My arm was fractured. 4 ribs were cracked. But I was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. 4 successful Taran attacks. I was the only person in the world who had done that. The only pilot who had rammed 4 enemy aircraft and survived. They gave me the hero of the Soviet Union this time, the highest honor. They couldn't refuse anymore, not with a record like that. I spent 10 months in that hospital. 10 months learning to walk again, to function with only one eye, to deal with the pain that never quite went away. 10 months listening to the war continue without me, reading the reports of battles won and lost, watching other pilots become the heroes while I lay in a hospital bed. The doctors said I'd never fly again, said my depth perception was too impaired with only one eye, that my reflexes were too slow from the injuries, that I'd be lucky to work a desk job. They were trying to be kind, I think, trying to let me down gently. But I did fly again. Convinced the medical board I was fit for duty, though it took arguments and demonstrations and calling in favours from commanders who remembered my record. They assigned me as a flight instructor initially, teaching new pilots how to survive, how to fight, how to kill. But eventually I talked my way back into combat operations, first as a deputy regimental commander, then back into active flying. I scored more victories after that, 6 additional kills, bringing my total to 28, though some sources claim different numbers, and honestly, I'm not sure anyone was counting accurately by that point. But none of those kills were by ramming. I never performed a 5th Taran. 4 was enough. 4 was my limit, the point where luck and skill and whatever else had kept me alive finally ran out of credit. The war ended eventually, as wars do. We stood in Berlin, victorious, having paid for that victory with an ocean of blood and mountains of dead. I survived it all, though I'm still not sure how. Statistics say I shouldn't have. The odds were against me from that first ramming over Zagorsk. Everything after that was borrowed time. They asked me once, years later, why I did it, why I kept ramming German aircraft when I knew the odds, knew that most pilots who tried it died. I didn't have a good answer then, and I still don't now. It wasn't courage. Courage implies a choice, and most of the time it didn't feel like I had one. It wasn't patriotism, though that was part of it. It wasn't even hatred of the enemy, though I felt that too. Maybe it was just mathematics. The cold calculation that one Soviet fighter could destroy one German bomber if the pilot was willing to accept the cost. Maybe it was desperation, the understanding that we were fighting for survival, and survival demanded everything we had and more. Maybe it was just the war itself, grinding away at us until all that was left was the mission and the determination to see it through no matter what. Or maybe I was just insane. That's possible too. But I survived. Against all odds, against all reason, I survived. 4 ramming attacks, 28 total victories, 1 eye, more scars than I can count, and a chest full of medals that don't mean as much as they should. That's my legacy. That's my story. And somewhere, in German cemeteries and unmarked crash sites scattered across Russia, are the men I killed, the pilots and crews of those aircraft I rammed, whose names I never knew, whose faces I saw only for seconds before impact. They were sons and brothers and fathers too, caught in the same grinding war machine. They were just doing their duty, just following orders, just trying to survive. Just like me. I think about them sometimes, on quiet nights when the memories won't let me sleep, wonder what their stories were, what they thought in those final moments when they saw a Soviet fighter diving at them with no guns firing, when they realized what was about to happen. Wonder if they cursed me in those last seconds, or prayed, or simply accepted their fate. The war made monsters of us all, I think, heroes and monsters, and sometimes the line between the two was so thin you couldn't see where one ended and the other began. We did what we had to do to survive, to win, to protect what we loved, and the cost of that was measured in broken aircraft and broken bodies and broken souls. 4 Taran attacks. 4 times I deliberately crashed my aircraft into an enemy plane. 4 times I should have died. 4 times I survived. I'm still not sure which would have been worse.